Well, the peace agreements that have been signed haven't been respected on the ground by both parties at one time or another. And going forward, I mean, is really, I think, a continuation of the process to date, which is to continually raise the costs of not implementing what they agree to and to push them to reach further agreements, for example, on implementing a transitional government. And so the IGAD, the regional organization which is leading the mediation, has talked about punitive measures if they continue to avoid dealing with the issues of peace and implementing what they've signed. It's, I think, getting to the point now where IGAD and their international partners need to continue to ratchet up the pressure on the parties. It's a bit of a delicate balance because you need to increase the pressure on the parties without removing their incentive to actually negotiate. And so how you use punitive measures to incentivize rather than de-incentivize is the critical balance that we have to reach. And we'll continue to work with IGAD on that. I'm going out to the region in 2 days to re-engage in this discussion of how we best can support the peace process. The issue between Sudan and the United States, it really has to do with how Sudan treats its own citizens. It was, after all, it was the genocide in Darfur, the renewal of conflicts in the two areas, the continued bombing of civilians, the use of ill-disciplined militias against civilians that really cause us the concern. It's a humanitarian concern. It's a human rights concern. And we believe that it leads to the weakening of the Sudanese state and to greater instability in the region. And so what we would really like to see Sudan do is change the way it deals with its own people. A good start would be to stop bombing them, stop allowing these militias free rein against civilians, to conclude cessation of hostilities agreements with those armed oppositions which are trying to defend people in their areas that are victims of these attacks, and then to move on with a genuine, comprehensive, inclusive national dialogue which will address the issues of how the center and the periphery of Sudan live with each other and engage with each other. South Sudan has missed a great opportunity at independence to create a new national identity, to focus on development and the improvement of the livelihoods of its citizens. So we want to try to turn this conflict into something that will really help strengthen South Sudan beyond the conflict. So the transitional agenda, the idea is not to just have a transitional government that will shift around who sits where and continues the same policies that drove the country toward the current conflict, but rather to undertake some of the fundamental structural adjustments that need to be made. For example, South Sudan is a state that was created out of 50 years of war. So there are a lot of armed men. What do you do with them? Security sector reform is critical. There was a security sector reform program the U.S. supported prior to the December conflict. It moved very slowly, and that needs to be revisited and strengthened and move forward more quickly. The national treasure, mainly oil revenues, the funds of the country, the resources of the country need to be used to develop the country. Too much of it went into private pockets, and so transparent public financial management is absolutely critical. The CPA did not include accountability mechanisms. So the South Sudanese relied upon reconciliation, sort of a truth and reconciliation approach. It did not really reconcile communities. They still remember what happened because much of the vicious fighting during the Civil War was actually South-on-South fighting. And so the idea of another conflict where people who created such misery, so many deaths, could get away with no accountability is something I think many, many South Sudanese really believe is necessary to ensure it's not repeated. And then there's the need for a new constitution. Not that the peace talks will come up with a constitution, but we'll set a process in motion for that, and then ultimately leading to national elections. Well, it's a real tragedy in South Sudan. It's a man-made humanitarian disaster. The country faces the risk of even famine in parts of the country. Roughly 40% of the population is dependent upon food aid of one sort or another. It's considered by the UN, I think, to be the most food insecure country in the world. The United States has really been the leader. We've been upfront. We've contributed over $720 million this year for humanitarian assistance, for internally displaced persons, for refugees who have had to cross the border into other countries for their safety. We encourage other countries to be more generous and to contribute to this. But at the same time that we're trying to deal with the consequences, we also are pushing those men who made this man-made conflict to bring it to an end, because this humanitarian situation will only get worse unless the conflict is brought to an end. So we have the two focuses, dealing with the consequences, but also trying to change the, stop the conflict and change the causes for it.